Today on the Eye of Power podcast, it's my great pleasure to welcome Brian Flom to the program. Brian is now the director of the Bureau of Talent Planning and Development for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And as such, he has 80,000 people that he is in charge of their developing and the talent acquisition and the people side of that aspect of it. So, a pretty big responsibility. Brian comes from a military background, decorated and a wounded soldier. He'll tell little bit about his story, some of his story there. And we get into a lot of how that kind of leadership and the types of things that are both in the way and the things that help us, which is exactly what we're trying to talk about here at the Eye of Power. So without any further ado, please help me welcome Brian Flom to the show. Welcome to the Eye of Power podcast. I'm your host, Tom Dardick. But this podcast is not about me. It's about you and your power. It's time to claim yours. Welcome, Brian. Glad to talk with you today. The thing I'm first wondering about is that backdrop you have there, that framed picture. I'm interested in what the story is about that.
Sure. First, Tom, thanks for having me. I'm pretty excited for this conversation. And as you can imagine, I've purposely set that up because when you're running out of things to talk about, having that picture in the background is always for the inquiring minds, provides a conversation piece. So I'll go all the way back to 2007. I was in the military before this. In 2007, I was serving in Baghdad, Iraq, and I was wounded in action from a rocket attack.
Wow.
Had shrapnel come in and went through you could see the scarf. I didn't have the beard now, but went through my upper jaw and broke my jaw and cut my throat on the inside and lodged
Oh my gosh.
in my neck. And I spent 8 weeks in the hospital down in San Antonio, Texas, Brooke Army Medical Center, recovering from my injuries. But I always tell people, like, that was the easy part, right? It's pretty easy, just be at the wrong place at the right time and you get blown up, and here we are. But something like that mental recovery is really what presented a challenge for me, right? And trying to figure out that the crucibles I was facing. This was the time of the military was facing a really high suicide, crisis, and they were trying to figure out, like, how do we throw these resources at it? So, like, every doctor I was going to, they were prescribing some new medication to me, and here, try this, and it wasn't working. I was getting into a pretty dark place. I went back to Iraq, back to my unit 8 weeks after recovering, and I was sitting in the dining facility one day with my boss, and we're watching the Boston Marathon on TV, eating lunch. Real easy to watch the Boston Marathon while you're eating lunch. And I said to him, I said, we should train for a marathon when we should do that when we get back. And he looked at me like I was crazy. But we did, and we got like 15 people from our unit to go train for the inaugural San Antonio Rock and Roll Marathon in Texas. And so
Wow.
when we came back from combat, we still had that community because we were meeting on Saturdays and we were running from one city to another because some of the runs were getting long, and it was all really about the food, like where could we run to for breakfast, right? And we were doing so. We did this over a few months, and then so that was November of 2008. We complete the marathon, kind of get through the holidays, and then like January of 2009, I would say, is like I just like fall off a cliff, right? And I just kind of felt like I lost my purpose. And what I didn't appreciate at the time was what exercise, what that community was doing for my mind, right? And how that was like so beneficial for me. And I didn't have an appreciation for it until I didn't have it. So one day my wife says, "Hey, you've always enjoyed mountain biking. Why don't like, why don't we get back onto mountain bikes?" And like, she created a monster, right? Like, it just like brought back, and I realized that mountain bikes were much more expensive than they ever used to be. And I was all in, like, because like when you give me the green light, or I perceive you're giving me the green light, like, let's go buy mountain bikes, right? So we went and got mountain bikes and just absolutely loved it. And again, I was like back out in the woods. I was on the trails. I wasn't, distracted by a cell phone, and just me and nature and a little bit of, breathing hard and exercise, and spending time with my wife. And that was just a fantastic opportunity. So now fast forward to 2000 and probably 14, maybe 15, I get a note from a friend of mine, and he says, "Hey, You've always enjoyed mountain bike. I know you're like mountain biking. President Bush, George W. Bush, does this thing with veterans where he takes them like mountain biking. You should apply. You've got to be a Purple Heart recipient and intermediate mountain biker. So I'm like, let's check it out. So I'm in the middle of a field training exercise when I get this. I have like 3 days to get it in. I needed to like write a whole essay and why I thought it would be like why I was the right person for this. I needed a medical screening, so got that no problem. But I also needed they wanted a letter from a professional mountain biker attesting to my ability that I was at
Oh,
least an
wow.
intermediate mountain biker. And I'm like, man, I'm in the middle of Kansas. I could be in the middle of Los Angeles. I wouldn't know where to get that letter. So I sent
Yeah.
everything in but that. And I get a couple weeks later, I get a phone call and says, "Hey, congratulations, you've been, selected to go mountain bike on the President's Ranch in Waco, Texas, and you get to bring a guest too." So of course, like my guest is my wife who goes, and off we go. So that's 2015. I get to do this every year for a couple years, and in maybe 2000, man, maybe 17, I get an email from the president's staff, and it says, "Hey, the president has painted you. Please sign this waiver." I'm like, I don't know what that means, but I'll sign it. Here you go, and I send it back. And lo and behold, little did I know that he was doing a whole exhibit of veterans. So he painted 96 veterans in his exhibit and his book called The Portraits of Courage. I happen to have the honor of being one of those 96, and this is me, I guess, back right here. If you can see
Wow,
that,
I see it.
and
Wow.
yeah, and that's my.
So, so that painting was painted by George W. Bush?
No, this is what they call, I always pronounce it wrong, a glissé, which is like a
So,
fancy replica.
so
Um,
he, but the actual, so that's a replica of it, but the original was painted by him?
that's right. Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow, that's really amazing.
yeah. So it goes on towards like oil paintings, I guess. I'm not sure what exactly, but yeah, he painted me there and 95 other veterans.
Wow, that is really something. Because it's funny. It says when he painted you, I was like, what that term mean exactly? Like picking you out for something? I wasn't exactly sure. Like you meant literally painting, and so
That's
that,
right. Yeah. Yeah. I had no idea either. I'm like, this is odd. But okay. Yeah. But like when he came out of office, he just, kind of like I was describing the therapy for the mind of mountain biking, that outdoor exercise. Like he took to painting and he started painting world leaders and he was painting landscapes and painting some friends and stuff. And then he's like, man, what do I like? I want to really paint something, like something that means something to me. And somebody's
yeah.
that he painted veterans. So all post 9/11 veterans there.
So the people that were asked to pay a pretty high price, or at least risk a very high price in service. I got to believe that as a commander in chief, or really any leader, and of course you were a leader in the military, so you probably can tell us more about this. But um, my guess is the hardest thing is to give orders that put people in harm's way and or worse. Uh, you thinking it might be along those lines for him, or what do you think on that, Brian?
Yeah, I think so. And I asked him about that, right? And we all have like, I mean, obviously I don't have much experience as president of the United States, but we've all probably experienced things in our life where we've had to make a decision, and sometimes the right decision is not an easy decision, right?
Yeah.
And I have to believe that when he was president, based off the information that he had at the time, he thought he was doing what was the right decision. And so I do think it was like somewhat therapy. And I've asked him about that too. I'm like, okay, you do this, you want to bring these veterans out, the people that, ultimately you sent into harm's way. Like, what does that do to you? Right. And I think it was like, it was mutual. I mean, it's just fun to be out on mountain bikes. And I thought like when we were going to go riding with him, that it would be like riding with Miss Daisy, right? Like, oh, here's like a nice little thing, like, this will be like a pet event. Maybe you'll see the president if you look off in the distance or something like that. And it's not. It was like the most intimate experience. And like when you're sitting with the president in his dining room, next to him at his dining room table, and breaking bread and just talking and getting to know each other on a personal level, and just to see like what a caring person he is, and that connection. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. I think he likes my wife more than he likes me. Because every time, like whenever I see him, like my wife's from Germany, he's always like, how's the German? So it's pretty funny. And he's told her before that he's like, I have two favorite Germans in the world. One is Angela Merkel, former chancellor, and one is like, my wife Monica Flom, from little town Sexhelden, Germany. So it's kind of neat.
That's awesome. Wow, that's a great story. It's funny, speaking specifically about George W. Bush. He kind of had a reputation for not being that good a communicator and not being, but because I had a chance to see him in person,
Yeah,
and the difference in person versus the image that you got through the airwaves or through the discussions was literally night and day.
sure.
And so it doesn't surprise me that you had a positive experience. First of all, you don't get to be president if you're not personable and able to really get
Yeah,
people to
yeah,
connect and see what you're seeing, right? Otherwise,
right.
it just doesn't happen. But we want to vilify whether you're on one side or the other. You want to point at the other guy and say how bad they are, and then
Yeah,
you kind of lose the fact that no, that's a person with
yeah,
some incredible qualities to them, regardless whether you agree with them or not.
right.
They deserve
Yeah.
respect.
Yeah. Well, that makes it easier. I mean, if you think of, communications in general, right? Whenever every time that, whenever there's a human behind it, it's easy to have some type of bias one way or another. And, to your point, like to vilify somebody if you don't agree, you don't have that same viewpoint instead of trying to find that common ground. But it's pretty funny that you mentioned about kind of how he was portrayed with his communication style sometimes and maybe perceived as a little bit I don't know, aloof if you like, and some of it's just his Texas humor, right, and the draw that comes with that. But one night at dinner, I was sitting with him and Jay Leno was actually sitting next to me. So
Oh, wow,
like,
cool.
you think about like my world, like it's my wife and I with one side is President Bush and next to me is Jay Leno and she's sitting next to the president. Like what world like nowhere in my world does that happen. And he was talking about we were talking about like words people have used. And he said, so you may have heard like strategery, right? It was like associated with him. And
That was Will Ferrell on Saturday Night
that's
Live, right?
that's right. That's right. But
Yeah,
most people don't know that. Like he
yeah,
never said it. He was
right.
having dinner with Lauren Michaels, and Lauren Michaels is like, no, you never actually said that. We said that, and it just took off and it had him believing that he used the word strategery. He did say like he did own the word misunderestimate. He's like, yep, that one was on me. Strategery, he never said that. I thought it was absolutely
It's so
hilarious.
funny. It's a pretty good word. He probably wishes he did come up with it.
Right, right. And now, the irony of it all was like, the podcast through the Bush Institute is called the Strategist, right? So like it hasn't gone away, right? So it
That-
still continues to live in infamy.
well, it's like I remember another one off of Saturday Night Live was with Sarah Palin. Like you could see Russia from my house, that kind of thing.
Right.
That was it was a great joke, and that was Tina Fey, right?
That's right.
But people think that Sarah Palin thought that and
They
said
said
that.
that right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and that just kind of shows our human nature to want to maybe protect ourselves by either reducing or pushing away those we perceive either in our way or threats to our whatever our current values or whatever we think we believe our structure. We have this sort of built-in mechanism to protect that. And then when we don't do that, or when we do it mindlessly and forget some of the other things that happen to also be true about humanity, we get into these factions and into these problems. And of course, in today's environment, as we speak, it's as pitched as ever. And I'd sure like to see it kind of go the other way, where we can just be a little bit more respectful and open, be in the question more, and just talk to each other rather than kind of try to rail off into this camp or that camp. Which kind of is, I'm saying all this and I'm sort of steering towards, being somebody who is in charge of talent and development for the state. You've got an interesting perspective there because you have to bring lots of people together for lots of different purposes and in lots of different circumstances. So I guess my first question on that line, Brian, is do these differences come up? And if so, what are some of the ways or policies, or how do you coach people to deal with it?
Yeah. Well, as you can imagine, whether we're talking about state government or we're talking about the military, any of those organizations are made up of society, right? It's just it's the people. So, you're not insulated from whether it's your political, your religious, like whatever, ideals you have, you're not insulated from that. And I think that where we run into risk, regardless of what organization we're talking about, is when we try and completely separate the two.
Mm,
Say, okay, this is work, so, therefore any type of political discussion is verboten, and like we can't do that. We can't pull that apart, right? Like people are dealing with it. They've got these stressors, they've got these things in their mind that they're looking to unpackage. So how do we create an environment, which I think is where, inclusivity comes in, but how do we create an environment that is psychologically safe, right? That where everybody, regardless of their beliefs, are treated with dignity and respect, and we welcome, that conversation. We will welcome the difference, and it's okay, right? And we're still going to be, we're still going to be friends. We're still going to like have a relationship. We'll still be colleagues, and we won't hate each other, but we can sit down and just have a, have a discussion, maybe even some healthy debate that's not followed up. It's not constantly responding with yeah, but, or, and kind of pointing that you're wrong, instead of being, more inquisitive, like, well, tell me more about that, right? Like, asking these probing questions that want to explore that. So, as I look to, create an environment where people are treated with, merit and dignity and respect, you've got to be open and recognize that we're all humans. Because if you try and just compartmentalize it and make that separate, well, some people spend more time at work than they do, in their personal lives, right? Especially if you pull out, their waking hours. They need that, and we've got to create that space and recognize that it's going to be okay. And but I think what we have to do is develop people. How do you have those conversations? How do explore a little bit more of our cultural differences, our beliefs? And I think as we learn, if we would just take some time to learn more about each other and hear each other's stories, that's what's, I love about America, is that we're just comprised of, quote me, like 250 million, different stories, right? And when we bring that all together, that's who we are as a country, and it's pretty cool, I think.
yeah, I like the fact that you went to stories because um, s- as psychology sort of matures and advances, we're learning more and more that our minds are actually made up of narrative, right?
Mhm.
So in other words, everything really is story.
Yeah.
And then we have to also recognize the limits of our perceptive powers so that we think we know things, we think we see things, and that's empirical reality. And the truth of the matter is, we are not really good recorders of reality. We are great story creators,
Hmm.
and then of course, the closer our stories are to let's call it empirical reality, the more power they have, right? If they're way off, they don't have a lot of power because, if I think everybody is a horse and I want to ride everybody like a horse, it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
really going to work out too well for me sociologically, right?
Right.
So 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 not all stories are created equal, and a lot of our job, it seems to me, as human beings, is to keep getting our story more developed, higher quality, serves us and the world better, right? So that's kind of a good way to frame that, and it also points towards a path towards perhaps coming together. When I think, okay, look, this is the story that I'm telling myself. What's your story, and what can I take from that makes my story better?
Yeah.
And so now we're and if the other person's doing the same, now we're at least giving each other the respect that says your story is your story and it's valid. It
That's right.
has, from your perspective, it's the story.
Right.
So so for me to say your story is bunk or stupid or bad is disrespectful in the extreme. So
Yeah.
right. So really what I take from what you just shared, Brian, is that you're pointing towards respect.
I think respect and appreciation, right, of these stories. And so I was at a conference not long ago, and there was a presentation very focused on cultural sensitivity.
Okay.
And when I hear that sometimes I feel like it's like it implies that we've got to walk on eggshells, right? And instead, maybe focusing on like we focus on emotional intelligence, but how about cultural intelligence, right? Where it just really is, how do we harness these stories? How do we harness these experiences? And I become more culturally aware and accepting and appreciative of there's a lot of people, everybody who has lived a different life than I have, right? And I want to learn from that and I want to experience it. I want to hear your perspective because my perspective is very different. I remember when I was so I grew up in Los Angeles and I attended basic training for the Army in Fort McClellan, Alabama, right? And there's two things I learned when I was there. Was like one is boiled okra is not the same thing as asparagus, right? I was like, yeah, put that on my plate. Thought it was asparagus. It was and still is the most disgusting thing I've ever had in my life. Um, but the other thing that I remember very well is my bunkmate was from small town in Alabama, and he had never come across a black person before, and that just like
Wow.
boggled my mind. Like, I guess I mean I'll show my age. It was 1991, but just that the fact of me coming from Los Angeles, I mean it was like Los Angeles is like the melting pot of of America, and it just I was just like man, how neat is this though that like so this guy hasn't had that experience. He wasn't he wasn't like using it against anybody, but he hadn't had this experience, and now here we are in the military. We brought all these different experiences together from race, religion, socioeconomic status, and it was fascinating to me, and for 32 years in the Army, it worked pretty well.
Wow, that's cool. The I want to go back a second when you were saying about the cultural sensitivity and that idea about the eggshells. One of the things I think is a problem with, I think people who are well intended, they want to protect, they want to make sure that they uplift people who feel like they um, need some sort of assistance, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But when you said the eggshells things, I'm thinking like I have to be careful. I can't be maybe authentic. I can't, and also that there's some sort of harm that is going to come from a different point of view, right? That's sort of maybe a little bit of a an assumption that sometimes is made, where people, like safe spaces in colleges and so forth, and making sure we're, I don't know exactly, um, the 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 idea that differing ideas are innately harmful. I think that is in itself a limiting belief,
Right.
because it's not really harming you, right? It's part of your story. You have this story that says if somebody says something that I perceive doesn't fit in my picture, they're actually mean harm to me, and that's the story you're telling yourself. And I'm going to say that's an example of a mind virus that takes away your power. So on that kind of thing, do you see that, or you see something different than that? What's your view on that kind of observation, Brian?
Yeah, I think I don't know, I guess let's take like like Christmas and Hanukkah. Let's compare like so
Sure.
like I go to the market during the holiday season, and almost without fail the checker will say, "Hey, Merry Christmas." Well, I don't observe Christmas, right? I'm Jewish. I celebrate Hanukkah, and but my wife, we celebrate both, and that's another story. But I'm not offended by that. Like I don't, I'm not like that person didn't mean harm to me, right? And I shouldn't take it at that. But some people may be afraid to say, "Hey, Merry Christmas," because I don't want to, you may think I'm trying to do harm to you or something like that, and you could apply that to many other aspects. But
Sure.
but so we should be, be comfortable in society to say like, hey, Merry Christmas. Oh, thanks for that. I actually celebrate Hanukkah, but Merry Christmas to you as well, right? And it's done. Like, then the conversation's on, and we're kind of informing, okay, this is what I believe, this is what I, like what I wish. But thank you so much for recognizing, for even like acknowledging and being in person. And I shouldn't walk away and say, like, well, boycotting that market. They told me Merry Christmas, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, and this might point the arrow towards where uh, perhaps the path towards being more generous and more connected with each other is to recognize, look, we probably want mostly the same things.
Hmm.
In some cases, there might be some rivalry and some like I win, you lose, but most of the time, for most people in most organizations or in most situations, we probably when we peel all the layers of the onion away, we pretty much want the same things, right? We want to be seen for who we are, acknowledged for the value we have. We basically want people around us to have the same, be afforded the same. So we, the live and let live sort of thing. We don't want to see injustice. We don't want to see people harmed where they could have not been harmed. Um, and so after that, it's just the specifics. What do you think?
Yeah. I think grace goes along with, right? And just
Yeah.
kind of, recognizing people where they are and, being appreciative of that. And to your point, those rivalries, generally speaking, belong on the sports field, right? And then, but like you watch at the end, even those, like watch at the end of the game, most people are coming and they're, go to the Super Bowl, right? And they're hugging at the end and there's a lot of emotion because they all really wanted the same thing. Just one person got it and one didn't. Doesn't mean they're any
Well,
less or the
and the reality there, of course, is the people who got it don't get it without the cooperation of the people who didn't get it that
That's
time, right?
right.
So it
Yeah.
still is a cooperative venture.
Yeah. Yeah. And all the supporting people, whether you're the trainers, the like whoever it is, right? The person that's got to turn on the lights at the stadium, like it really takes, like, they say it takes a village. I mean, it literally does, and probably, a city for something like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. And then, of course, your opponent in those cases in sports, it's nice and clear. That's why the drama there is so nice. Um, the better your opponent is, the sweeter the victory, right? So you're actually rooting for your opponents. If you really are trying to be the best you possibly can be, you
Yeah.
want your opponents to be the best they possibly can be too.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's even like, so we were talking about, pickleball earlier,
Yeah.
and before we got started on this, but,
Yeah.
and I love to play, and somehow we've, like, my wife and I have found our way into this pickleball cult. I don't know how, but even, I was playing, today, and I was remarking with somebody, and I lost the game, and I said, I didn't mind losing the game because it was a close battle, right? And we even went into extra points. And I said, but I didn't mind losing it because we had such a wonderful competition, and and we still liked each other when we got off the field. And, I don't make close to the money. In fact, I spend more money than like a football player, does on this or something like that. But you're right. Like, you want that, that healthy competition, just like, going back to how do we bring our difference? You want that healthy debate, right? That's okay to just have that healthy conversation, that healthy dialogue, and appreciate somebody else's point of view.
Yeah. So, does any of these dynamics we've been discussing so far, Brian, apply in the world of work? And if so, what are some of the things that you might be able to share with our audience about that, if you can, if something comes to mind?
Hmm. That's a good question.
I mean, and it doesn't have to necessarily be in the spirit of competition per se, although sometimes it is because maybe not in the state or perhaps in the state. I don't even know. But oftentimes are the people we're serving have other options besides what we're offering them, and therefore we are sort of competing. And the better our competition is, the higher we'll probably get our value equation. The higher and better our value equation will be. So there is a competitive aspect in all aspects of life there, but it's also we're competing for our individual roles. We're competing for promotion. We're competing for resources in order to get the thing done that we think is important. So
Yeah.
there's all these dynamics that are happening at all times. So I'm just wondering, from your view, what are some of the things that people either should remember or, um, pay more attention to, let's say.
Yeah. Well, I think it's that we, especially like as leaders, have to create that environment of belonging, right? Like
Yeah.
realizing that we want those different perspectives. We want that different thought. I remember in the military, I never wanted to go like reach out and to bring somebody on my team and intentionally recruit them. I let the process work because I wanted that diversity of experience, that diversity of thought. I wanted that in my organization to kind of break that group think. So I think that belonging is one, and then it's about, creating shared values. So what is it that brings us here? Whatever your function is, right? Whatever your job is, but like, so what are those shared values that we're all on this team together, and we all share these, and we're going to espouse these values, and this is how we're gonna operate. The rest of it we're going to figure out as time goes on. But I think, so belonging and values really stick out to me.
Yeah, those are, I think, really important words. We have a product coming. We have a new company forming. Actually, I haven't had a chance to tell you much about it, but it's called the Mentor Machine. And part of what we're doing there, we're looking at, okay, what's the sense of belonging before we start, and how are we nurturing that and getting that to be maximized, and in the ways you just described, of course, because that turns out to be a super important metric. Matter of fact, we found that 11% increase in a sense of belonging translates into a 30% increase in retention.
Wow, interesting.
So it's like a force multiplier. That emotion, that feeling of being part of something and seen, it pays dividends in all kinds of huge ways. So
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's really important. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, just starts with the foundation of trust, right? Like,
Mm.
knowing that, like, you can trust me and I trust you, right? That's mutually expressive. And as the leader of that organization, I want to trust you to exercise disciplined initiative. So I look at, like my folks in my organization, right? It's up to me to communicate the intent based off the intent that I receive from higher, and then I trust, my folks to go and exercise that disciplined initiative. And sometimes we're not going to get it right, and that's okay. But I trust, if you exercise that process, right? And you had a good process in the front, and the outcome may not be how we wanted. It's kind of like, sometimes good decisions result in bad outcomes, and sometimes, bad decisions result in good outcomes, right? But recognizing, like, how did we get here? And then I trust you, and then we're going to learn from it. That's what, learning, growing organizations about. I'm going to trust you. You're going to trust me that I am trusting you, and that I have, I'm going to provide you that top coverage, and we're going to learn, and we're going to get better every single day. And it goes back to, how are we going to bring values and be valued?
I really like that point you're making there, Brian, about trust. Trust is a funky thing, some ways, right? Because it's pretty difficult to build very high. Like lots of trust takes some time and some sort of experience and truth, and it's really easy to tear down. You could
Right.
lose it all
In a
in
minute. Right.
with one
Yeah.
move.
Yeah.
And then also it's got, best I can tell, I'm going to run this by you and see what you think. Um, Best I can tell, it has two components to it. It has and I think of pedals of the bike. So on one pedal, we've got the character side of, like, I want the good intention. I am aligned with the organization. I'm aligned with what we all consider to be good and proper outcomes. I can be trusted to do what I say, these kinds of things. And then the other pedal of the bike is the competency pedal, right? Like, I might want the best for you, but that doesn't mean you should trust me with your heart surgery. That would be a really bad
Yeah.
investment of trust, right?
I'll keep that in
Not
mind.
trained. Yeah. Not trained, not don't know anything, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of need both. So it seems to me that means leaders have to extend trust, but they have to do so with both of those things in mind, so you have to pick and choose, or at least you have to bring some sort of, I don't want to say boundary, but some sort of definitional aspect of what
Mhm.
it is that we're, entrusting. What's your
Yeah.
view on that whole point there, Brian?
Yeah, interesting. So, one of the things I love, like in the Army, they had something they called the three C's, and it was character, competence, and commitment, right? And it was always the question or the discussion of which one's more important,
Mm.
right? And 99% of the people, and I know that's anecdotal, I didn't do an official survey, but I feel like more often than not would say the character piece is the most important, right? Because I can train that competence piece, right? I can develop somebody to build up that confidence, to an extent. Like, I don't want neither you nor I should be doing heart surgery, right? So, but I would always refer back to and say, and I would offer that I think the commitment is the most important, right? Because if you're committed to being a leader of character, right, that's kind of this innate ability, and it's through self-awareness. and then but you're committed to working on that competency piece as well. So maybe that's the bicycle seat in your, in your
Ah,
analogy, right? And you're committed to that competency and say recognizing that, hey, I've got gaps in my, there's holes in my swing, I guess, and there's some things I've got to learn to increase my competence. Either I have to learn it, or I have to understand who on my team possesses those competencies, right? And again, going back to that trust, not just saying it, but trusting them as well to help fill those voids and bring that team together.
that's really a great point. It's funny because I was writing this down. I'm thinking, okay, character, competency, commitment. Commitment seems to me to be intricately hitched to character. In other words, if I it takes character to actually commit,
Mhm.
because a lot of people will give you a yes, or they'll say sure, and then something minor comes up and then they're not there. And I
Yep.
would say that if you are somebody who's not, um, the word that Don Miguel Ruiz uses in Four Agreements is impeccable with your word, um, it's hard to, necessarily give as much trust the next time, because chances are good. I have friends and people in my life that when they say give me a yes, they're going to be there. I'm penciling it in at like a 20 per 30% chance that they'll actually be there.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a different level of trust than the ones that I really treasure, that when they say they're going to be there, unless lightning strikes, they're going to be there.
Yeah.
I much prefer making plans with those people.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so they get a different kind of trust. What's your view on that dynamic?
Yeah. I think you learn who those people are. Going back to to your 20 and 30%, I want to try and give some folks some grace in there too, and perhaps like maybe I'm a perfect example of us trying to get together for this time, and dealing with some illness and some travels, and you like penciled me in, and then like, oh no, that 30% was going down to 10, and I'm like,
But just to set the record straight, I do not put you in that category.
okay, good. Um, but like we all know, and it's probably on one hand who we can fully count to be there when when push comes to shove, and I don't know, I guess I try and while relying on them, you try and groom that other end, right? Those 20 to 30%, because if you're not careful, you're going to burn out those ones that you're sure are going to be there, right? Because like, oh, you're reliable. I mean, you think about it in a work environment. What often happens is the ones that are really competent, we call on them the most, right? Because like I know that they're going to get it done, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. And
Sure.
the people who are maybe less competent, less reliable, we'll push them kind of off to the side. So how do you bring that together? Because that causes tension within the workplace too,
Sure.
right? Within your people, it's like, oh, there's always coming to me. This person, they're getting paid the same, but they're often in left field doing their own thing. So how do we, bridge that and build them together and create opportunities where like, okay, you're gonna have to pull your weight, and if not, you're gonna be held accountable for that. That doesn't work when it comes to like, hey, you want to come over and move a couch, and somebody doesn't show, but we know who those people are as well.
Yeah, it's the dynamic you just sort of pointed to. A couple things is, one thing is the idea of, it's pretty damaging for a leader to play favorites, pick favorites, right? Because now we're going to fuel the story of rivalry rather than starve it, right? We're
Yep.
we're giving evidence of the story of injustice, or of just, oh, everything's out to get me, or he doesn't like me, or whatever. And now I'm actually taking away the person's opportunity to feel like they're seen, heard, valued, be able to grow into something. And the other aspect of what you just said there, what you know make sure what we do is actually moving them. If they're at 25%, we're trying to get them to 35%,
Mhm.
right? If at 35, we're trying to get them to 45, right? We're trying to build those muscles, and by we don't want to do that by deflating them or making them feel othered. You pointed to earlier the idea of people feeling psychologically safe. And if I feel like I'm othered, that's not very safe. That doesn't feel very safe, right?
Yeah, yeah, and probably results in, the opposite of what you're hoping to achieve, right? Because
Yeah,
now if I don't feel safe, I don't feel safe to speak up. I don't feel safe to share my opinion or my experience or my thoughts on, a project, whatever that is. I'm going to start to withdraw even more, and that, now, potentially that 35% becomes to, 10% or 5%, and
sure.
yeah, and eventually, as we think of it, and you mentioned earlier about like employee retention, like, now I'm out of here, right? Like I don't
Yeah,
want to be part of this team. I don't feel like I belong. I don't feel like I'm valued. So I'll go find, hopefully somewhere where perhaps I'm more valued. So it's that,
sure.
that leader's role to, bring that all together and realize like, nobody's on the team unnecessarily, although they would feel like it sometimes, right? Like, but like we really need everybody on the team and to row together. I love the analogy, and I don't know if we spoke about it before, but I always think of the conductor in an orchestra, right?
Yeah, I think in a past conversation we did. I
Right, we,
love
we,
this.
we
Go
talked
ahead.
about
Yeah,
that,
go ahead.
and that conductor's role is to, we always hear this like we want everybody on the same sheet of music. Well, you don't. And if you think of the way an orchestra is set up between the woodwinds and the percussions and the brass, all of their music is different, and it's that conductor who needs to bring that all together. And sometimes, similar to, like we were talking about with like who's pulling their weight a little bit more, those people who are really pulling a lot of weight, maybe they're a little bit too loud. Let's tamper that down a little bit. And the folks like, hey, I can't hear you in the back. Let's bring that, let's bring that up until we've got it all coming together in harmony. So, that's always my go-to. I love,
That and that's such a beautiful analogy. Because it's easy to picture what we're talking about. It's great that way. So the question then becomes, how do you get the virtuoso pianist who's featured out front, um, and the person who's, let's say, playing triangle and tambourine in the back, to feel like they're perhaps get the same amount of grace?
yeah. Well, it's, or there's me with my recorder, right? Who's off because I have no musical inclination
Or you're
whatsoever.
just up there with the baton. I mean, how hard is
That's
that?
right. I'm just like swinging this, and a little bit of eyebrows, but again, that's but that's that conductor's role, right? It's like okay, let's pull that out. Let's pull that triangle out a little bit. I want to hear that. You want to be able to recognize that in the song. I want to recognize that in my work. And hey, you on the piano, a little too hard on the key. Let's bring that down because and sometimes it's so Army's big on after action reports. I think we all after reviews. But we're always like, so what can you do with that? Even with using this music analogy, could I listen to that? Could I play that? And like, all right, let's talk about this and creating that safe space where like, hey, you on the piano, pretty loud there. Do you hear that? Like, do you hear the triangle? Nope. Because you're too loud, right? And you on the triangle, a little more confidence, like a little ding, ding, ding. Chow was ready. Let's and bring that all up.
So this seems like perhaps a minor point, but at first glance, but actually it seems to be extremely major, because what you're talking about is truly communication and connection between, in this case, the conductor, the leader, but the person who's responsible for, how well is this performance going, um, and you're pointing towards the need for really constant and effective communication to and to be able to make that happen. While the thing's going on, our communication is literally just one little swipe of the
Yeah,
baton. But in an after action, or in the case of the world of work, where we're sitting down for our weekly or monthly or quarterly or whatever review it is, we're actually not going towards, all right, I didn't screw up, just give me a raise.
right.
The default setting, to something like, okay, look, here's where you were a little too loud, here's where you're a little too quiet, here's
Yeah,
where your timing was slightly off, here, look, you're phenomenal in this way, how can we figure out a way to get you doing more of that?
yeah,
Here's a place where we could use some improvement. What can we do to rate, if you're coming in at a 4 or 5 out of 10 rating, what can we do to make it a 6 or 7?
yeah,
That sort of thing,
yeah,
right? and,
yeah,
and
yeah.
just continual thing with how we work with our teams.
Yeah, you're doing that in stride, right? So like I always tell folks, when you
Yes,
think about your performance review, like that should never be a surprise to anybody.
that's right.
Like I'm gonna wait for 12 months to tell you how you're doing, right? Like you're doing it in stride, and then going back to the conductor, you're doing a lot of it through subtle nonverbals because that conductor's not like, hey, a little bit more in the back, right? Like it's just it's the baton, it's some look, it's some eyebrows, it's like some of them are more animated, they're like cross their arms, right? Like and just like it's the ears, it's a little bit of this, and that's the same thing in the like to really empower your folks in the workplace. It's those like if you can do like there's some behaviors right that we just have to address right there and it's pretty hard and it's coming out of our mouth but we hope to not have an environment like that most times, but it's those subtle in stride improvements and shaping of that environment that I think are most impactful and what people will appreciate because it was just done in a way that allows them to grow in a safe way and allows them sometimes even to fail without being a failure, right? Hey, we didn't get this right, so let's learn this as we go here instead of, well, you really messed up the last 12 months. I'm sorry. Like try again next year, right? Like
Yeah, that's a
that's not
little too
good, right?
coarse.
You know,
That's a little too coarse an adjustment, right?
right.
So what do you see, Brian, are the forces that are sort of in the way? Because I don't think it's what we're talking about is really too much of a secret that people don't understand this, at least intellectually. I think most people in the world of work know these things. But then when we go, at least in my experience, I'll go and I'll find people that are really not walking this sort of walk. And so my question to you is, what do you see that sort of gets in the way?
Yeah, I think people are afraid of feedback, right? And and using that to help be self-reflective. So like I remember I was leading a group and they were doing these 360s, right? These like
Yep.
leadership inventories and one of the
Those are like those are like strategic carpet bombing of finding
right.
out what's going on with
That's
people.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great way to report anonymously, right? And but I remember somebody was had indicated that, hey, my team thinks I'm a micromanager. That's what I read in this. Like they think I'm a micromanager. So it's like, I'm gonna go back to the office, I'm gonna bring them all in. I'm like, if you think I'm micromanaging, like you gotta let me know. I'm like, no, don't do that. Like be reflective and be self-aware of your behaviors. So I think that's that like a barrier is just like we don't like we want to think like especially when you're leading an organization like you're the most handsome, you're the most beautiful, like your jokes are the best, right? Like and everybody laughs at you until you're not in that position anymore, and then you're like you weren't so beautiful, you weren't so handsome, and your jokes really suck. But so just having some of that self-awareness and like and if you listen to your folks, they're going to give you feedback and it's going to come in different ways, right? It may come in a question, it may come in the tone of an email, maybe a comment. People are really good about saying stuff out loud that they want you to hear, and you've got to be willing to listen to that and adjust and be reflective of it. And then I
Yeah,
think,
I want to take a
yeah,
moment just to look at that because I think that's a really important one because most of the time people are not keeping their feelings secret. They might not come straight out and hit you over the head with a baseball bat,
yeah,
but if you're not if you're on the lookout for it, if you're not actively trying to not hear it,
yeah,
then you're probably going to hear it. Just like for instance the example you just shared, Brian, with micromanage. What's the person really those what the feedback really is you're not respecting me and giving me enough autonomy is what they're
right,
really saying, right?
yeah, yeah,
So that's the actual message. That's the feeling they have. Whether that feeling is founded or not, that's a discussion you need to have, but that's the feeling. So you got
right,
to
yeah.
start there, right?
Yeah, and their perception is their reality, right? It's but
Exactly. If they
and
feel it, you can't say it's not
right.
real.
No,
It's
you're
that
not
real.
feeling. You don't feel that, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. You're
exactly.
not
That
feeling that
means it's a real
micromanaging,
thing
right?
and it has to be dealt
Yeah,
with. Yeah.
yeah. And sometimes it's very subtle. Going back to that, like I know when I come out of my room, if I'm going to go out to dinner with my wife, and she says, "Are you wearing that shirt?" Like I know what she means by that, right? It's like you should probably go change your shirt, is what she. Like, she's not asking me that because she thinks it looks really good on me. It's like
Exactly.
I go change it. So yeah, I think they'll just listening and being aware and understanding your environment for those cues because they're gonna come into you, and it's not just from your people, it's gonna be from your peers, and it's gonna be from above as well, right? And and what are we doing with that information? Because if somebody's asking you a question or sharing a thought, it's like they're usually not asking for a friend, like
Exactly.
there's something behind it. So I had to be reflective.
Even when they say they are, they're not.
Even though they are right, asking for a friend. No, you're asking for for you. And then I think like nowadays, right, like 2025, where just like we see things changing like rapidly, probably
Oh
that
my
we've
gosh.
never seen before, right? Like the environment, the world we live in, and you pick what it is, whether it's technology or politics or the global environment, like it's changing so fast that like we've got to be, the word I learned the other day, and I've actually been using in some presentations, is called messianism, right? And MISONEISM, but it means a fear of change or innovation.
Mm.
So, if you think of the old, hey, we've always done it that way. That's how it's always been, right? And I've seen that, we've all witnessed that in many organizations,
That's right.
where we just get stuck in that, right? Like it's always been that way. How can we, again, like, how do we challenge that status quo, and do it in a way where it's not just to disrupt things for the sake of disrupting it, but let's learn and understand things. And I love when I would ask people, hey, well, why do we do it that way? And they say, well, that's why we've always done it. And I say, well, tell me more about it. Sometimes the way we've always done it is the best way. Like, we should keep doing it that way. But sometimes
There's always a reason it was that way. The
that's right.
question is it still the
Yeah,
best and the most valid way? Yeah.
that's right. And sometimes like as you again, you create that environment, that safe space where you allow people to start to talk that through. Sometimes you can just see that light bulb, that aha moment goes off in them, and like, why did those words just come out of my mouth? Like, that doesn't make any sense why we're doing it. And then like, okay, now let's walk together and figure out how do we improve this and how do we make things a little bit better. So just kind of getting stuck in the past, and we live in a world where like you can't admire the problem, you can't admire that change. We've got to change it now because it's going to change without you. Otherwise, you wind up like Blockbuster, or I always refer back to Kodak is probably one of my favorite examples, right? Like they were around for like 125 years, but yet they couldn't embrace the digital camera, and like, man, you evolved. Like you think about like how technology has evolved, and how like taking pictures has evolved over 125 years, and then insert this digital camera and like,
Yeah.
nope, not gonna do it.
Yeah, I mean we're and to some degree we all fall in this trap. We're prisoners of our paradigms, and it takes some, I think, extra special effort, and it takes cooperation with other people because we don't know what we don't know. We don't see our blind spots by definition. So we have to extend trust, and we have to have trusting relationships with others in order to avoid traps such as the one you just mentioned, Brian.
Right. That's right.
So that's the benefit. So I have one basic question left that I wanted to get to that we haven't gotten to yet, which is, so again, you're responsible for moving teams in a positive direction at scale because you're, in charge of developing for really the entire state government, if I'm not wrong on
Yep.
that, correct?
Mhm.
So that's how many people we talking about here?
Just 80,000.
Just a few, just a measly 80,000.
That's it. Yeah.
So this is a pretty large, let's call it charge here.
Mhm.
And so my question is, the principles we've been laying out, and I'm sure there's lots more that we could dive into, but we're coming up on an hour already. So my question is, how do you take these kinds of principles, scale them up so that they're being as effectively and efficiently driven home to as many of that 80,000 on a consistent basis as possible?
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of just, kind of juxtapose your comment about scaling it up. And I say where we miss a lot, in large changes, we don't scale it down very well.
Oh,
Right.
scale it down.
Right. And we don't echelon that very well.
So in other words, it's an easy trap to fall into. Okay, this is what everybody's doing, and you
Yeah.
lose the fact that, wait a minute, the work is on the ground in
Right.
each department or in
Yeah.
each unit.
Yeah, I mean, getting that to those, to what they call the frozen middle, right? Like how do if I can embed that change, if I can embed that development, whatever it is, into that middle, because they're the ones who are having the contact with, like your rank and file workers every day. The people up at the top, like, oh, that sounds nice. Yeah, that's a wonderful program. Let's do that. But how do I get them to echelon that, and then people to own it, right? Like if I just come up with a program and I only deliver that to the individual, but it's not owned by leadership. Like I tell everybody, the learning and development strategy of any organization is only as good as the leadership wants to create of that organization. Like 70% of a person's development comes from that environment that they're in, from those leaders that are that are in there every day. the intentional programs is only about 10%, right? And then the other
Right.
20 is just kind of self-actualization. Like, how do we, see ourselves in here? So, I charge, I challenge people a lot, like, okay, I'm going to give you this, but then what are you going to do with it? Right. And how are you going to echelon that down? And where do I need to insert that? Like, I remember, once I had a call and says, hey, there's two, this person called and said, hey, two of my direct reports aren't communicating very well. Do you have some training you could give them to communicate better? And I was like, no, I don't. Like, I have training I can give you. Like we can work together, right, to empower you. Because, like, so, like, where do you echelon that? Like, sometimes it's above, sometimes it's below. What is it we need to fix? And then just spend some time coaching that person. Say, okay, let's talk about the communication environment that you're creating. Does that promote, or does it allow, hey, this person's they're that 90% that I can count on, and they're that 10%. So that
Sure.
10%, I'm going to push them to the side because I can always rely on that 90% person. And that causes burnout with him as well. And it causes envy on the other side and doesn't lead to anything good.
Yeah. Well, if I can sort of condense what I heard you say there, Brian, it seems like, well, the reason the bar isn't higher is because it's really, really hard.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Right. Yeah.
it's because I mean that's a big scale and a big job, and we only have so much energy and so much time during the day,
Yeah.
and then of course we're going against personality, and everybody's got their individual stories, and so it becomes a massive challenge like that. There's one thing that I've learned in my walk in the last, I don't know, couple decades, and that is I've learned to be less enamored with the answers to questions and the content intellectually of teaching people things, and much more so in the setting up of actions that they're doing. I think we human beings are much more a creature of habit and what we are doing than we are what we're taught and what we think. Not
Mhm.
that it's zero and not that it's 100. They're related to each other, of course.
Yeah.
But I think in the development world, I think we tend to lean too much on the content and not enough on the actions that are sustained over time, the expectations and the measurement systems that we're doing to cause people to continually come out of their comfort zone as a habit, because that's where the growth is, right?
Right.
Growth is doing things you're not comfortable doing, right?
Yeah.
So and people are going to naturally resist that no matter what. Nothing you and I can come up with to change that.
Right. Right.
But we have to create circumstances that just bring them just as a matter of course to do that. I don't know of anything kind of any substitute for that. What's your view of that dynamic, Brian?
Yeah. So, having come from a world, not just, in the military and a little bit of, the academic environment there, and then now some of this is that there's often this, like, natural, I guess, friction or resistance between the theory, like the content that's being taught, and then the practice, right? So if I can't communicate to people like, hey, this is the theory, and then this is how you put it into practice, they're never going to come together, and you're going to wind up having this constant pull of, like, who came first, the chicken or the chicken or
Right.
the egg, right? And like, really, we want chickens and eggs, right? Because we like they're both very good. So, like bringing those together and getting people to say, like, okay, these are the words, here's the content of the question, like, whatever it is, and here's what you do with it. And or getting them to kind of, self-realize and create that habits, like, I'm going to give you this, what are you going to do with it, right? And then creating an environment where, that we're coaching them, maybe accountability we could call it, but creating that environment where, and we're gonna monitor, and we're gonna talk, and we're gonna follow up, and it just can't be a one and done. So I'm gonna deliver you this content. We're gonna talk about how you apply it. You're gonna tell me what you're gonna do with it, and then I'm gonna kind of walk along with you on this journey.
Yeah. Yeah. So the leaders are just never off the hook.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
That's what it
you're
comes
all,
down to.
yeah. I mean, you're always on, and people are always watching you, right? Like, so, are you modeling those behaviors? Are you modeling that? Is just, and we could talk about that, and tying that to character. All, that maybe part two of this, if you have any.
Yeah, absolutely. It often happens when I'm having these discussions that there's always more we can go. So
Yeah,
maybe we will pick this up at a future time and
yeah,
keep
yeah.
going. That'd be great. Yeah, so well, I guess that means that we're at a kind of a natural closing point. I think we covered a good amount of ground there, Brian. So I want to thank you very much for that. You shared a lot of great insight, practical. You come from a particular walk. You know, you're going through the military, paying a particularly high price, with you had to go through a physical ordeal, and you had all that. Those experiences came from that, and then kind of coming into uh, the non-military world. I'm sure that's a bit of a challenge, and so you know, uh, you're doing it pretty well. So thank you very much for sharing. Appreciate it.
No, I appreciate this, Tom, and I enjoyed the conversation, and look forward to more in the future. But it's just I think it's about like all of us. It's about just bringing perspective, right? And sometimes our job as leaders is just to help keep the small things small. My team always hears that all the time. Like we'll figure this out. And coming from that military world where sometimes the consequences could be injury or death, right? For somebody to like, okay, now we're here. If we mess this up a little bit, we're gonna be okay, and we're gonna learn from that. And we'll try better next time with our facilitation or our training and development. But it's all important, and like we said about earlier, it's the eye of the beholder, and perception is somebody's reality. So I appreciate though the conversation and spending time with you today.
Wonderful. Brian, thank you so much for being with me today. That was a boatload of fun. I knew it would be. And again, I appreciate your insights and your willingness to share. So thanks so much. A couple of things that I just want to highlight for our audience. Um, the, when you're telling your story about your recovery, and of course it led to that painting you had, which is really cool. George W. Bush actually painted you in a painting, and you were able to spend time with him. That's kind of a cool thing. But you said something that really stuck with me. Like you didn't say this exactly, but the idea that our mental recovery is kind of harder than the physical part of recovery. You know, you took 8 weeks in a hospital to recover from the shrapnel you took, and of course, I'm sure that was no picnic. But for a lot of our wounded soldiers, the mental part is where the tough part is, and you're able to find a path forward through the marathons and then the bike riding, and that physical, when we do physical things where we feel kind of alive, we're out in the world seeing nature, and the endorphins we get from exercise. All these things are very good for the soul and very good for our physical bodies too. So I think that's good advice to anybody, whether military or not, anybody who's feeling sort of down or feeling like just a bleak sort of outlook. Uh, get out there in the world, move your body, get out in nature, and it's going to be awfully hard to stay in the exact same spot. I think it'll usually be very healthy for you. Um, you know, to reestablish a sort of a sense of purpose, or at least a sort of connection. Then when we got to the world of work, you pointed towards, people maybe they try to sort of separate from each other, whether we're in a disagreement or for whatever reason. We don't naturally care for one another. But what we really need to do is we got to, when we're in a leadership position or creating a better culture, we really need to create a place where you don't have to separate yourself out, where um, what you truly believe, no matter whether it's political or religious, that it's not a problem to share what the truth and what your story is that's superior or preferable to a place where we're trying to compartmentalize. And I think that's a huge and a very important point. I think the best cultures are one where people feel like they can just be themselves and they don't feel like they have to be careful about things. Um, and, you know, the way to get there, you pointed towards being psychologically safe. And what are the conditions of psychological safety? Well, we have to be free to make mistakes. We have to be free to be able to be wrong, because we are all wrong a lot. So if you are under the illusion that you're not, you got some work to do there. But the psychological safety means one of respecting the other person's stories, and you know wanting to hear what that might be. I think that's really important. That leads to an environment of belonging. And I took the time to mention how important that is. That's that sense that you belong to something, that what you're doing matters, that you're part of something where other people are bought in too, and it gets beyond that. just what we're personally doing, to a sense of contribution to a bigger cause. And of course, that fills up our sails quite nicely. That's what we get to when we talk about the purpose quadrant, and our sense of contribution in the way that we and only we can. The three C's that you mentioned in the military of in the Army specifically, of um, character, competency, and commitment. I think that's a good little shorthand for us to pay attention to as to what we can do. And then you also took another lesson from the military and shared that with us, the after action reviews, where something happens, we don't just let it go. We actually take a moment to review and say, okay, here's what we like, here's what went wrong, here's what we learned, and here's what we're going to take and adjust as a result. And you do that in stride, is the word that Brian used. You do that as a matter of course, and then you're not sitting there in a annual review and there's these surprises. That would be a big failure in terms of difference, in terms of effectiveness of helping somebody grow. So that's important. And speaking of failures, we need to be able to fail without being a failure. So we need to be able to feel safe messing up, and you don't get labeled. You're a person, so you missed on that one, and this is the lesson we're learning as a result, and we go on. What we'd like to do is, uh, when we're healthy, we don't take too many of the same failures, right? We fail, we adjust, and then we fail in a different way, and then we adjust, and then we fail in a different way. And so we don't have to spend energy relearning the same lessons at a higher and higher price. Uh, and then, so what helps us in this dimension is, uh, not being afraid of feedback. A lot of people don't want to hear it. They feel like they don't want to hear some of the things that sort of shine light on them. And so we got to be self-aware, and we got to be in the question about ourselves. What aren't I seeing as a leader? And then that tone deafness that can come if we're trying to hold up a story against reality, and input coming that goes against it. We can become tone deaf, and we can become less effective as a result. Uh, Mesonism, Mesonism is a word that Brian shared with us, the fear of change or innovation. And I see that a lot in my work, where people are just, hey, it took me forever to figure out this way. Don't anybody change it now on me. And I can understand that investment in a certain, you got an expertise, or you got a certain procedure, or you got down here sort of in a groove on something, a procedure or a approach, and you don't want that to be changed because it took a lot to get there. But staying put is more often than not on that is going to be a losing cause. So we need to adjust and not change for change's sake, but have a more mature, um, and developed, I should say, relationship with change. And I thought that was important. And then when I asked about, at a large scale, when you have a responsibility for a lot of people, what can you do from up there? And his first reaction was scale it down, and into the we call the frozen middle, which I think is probably something that large organizations, whether it's a state organization or a large corporation, they can all relate to that, because the bigger you are, we lose that agility, right? More things are systematized, more things have more layers to them, and it's harder and harder to move and get everybody to see the same thing. So you kind of get calcified. So that's the frozen middle. And so the path that Brian pointed us out there is to talk to people, right? Is to connect with them, and not just change them, but help them help others, and sort of to be a force multiplier that way. He also mentioned keep small things small, which I think is a really good policy, right? We're going to have enough problems in our life. We don't need to amplify those outside their actual size, and spend energy where it could otherwise have been better invested. And of course, uh, you know, people who do this, probably everybody, right? We all do this to some degree. So to rely on other people to help us keep things in perspective. A lot of times when we're really amped about something, feeling very strongly about something, it's outsized by definition, because we're looking at the immediate, And so we can keep things small by just sort of taking our perspective back a little bit and looking at a slightly bigger picture, and that'll help us redirect our energy in a more efficient way. So I thought that was a lot of wisdom for one show. So again, thank you, Brian, and thank you for listening to us. Till we see you again on the iPower podcast. This has been the Eye of Power podcast with Tom Dardick. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'd also like to thank my brother, Scott Dardick, for the music and his music production. If you'd like to reach me, simply email Tom at dardickcommunications.com